Hello.
Hello.
Is this a normal one?
No, it's not. You're Hannah. I'm Saruti.
Okay.
Welcome to RedHanded.
Okay, right. Sorry, I'm Hannah.
I'm Saruti.
Welcome to
Yeah, we've just been having a powwow because this is being recorded on the 1st of March. So about 9 days before we board our first plane to go on tour. And we are in Crazy Town right now because we're packing the suitcases and packing in the recordings. So if we sound a little bit frazzled, that's why.
It's because we are.
So enough of that. What's up today, Hannah? What are we doing?
What are we doing? We're going to the Channel Islands.
Oh, a place I've never been literally or in my red-handed imagination.
Yes, you have.
Have we?
Yep.
When?
We did the Beast of Jersey.
Oh, yes.
Channel Islands, the only part of the United Kingdom to be occupied by the Nazis.
Oh.
There's loads of films about it. But there you go. So, yeah, Jersey, we are going to today. You might not know loads about it unless you live there because the island of Jersey doesn't really tend to make a fuss because they've all got loads of money and they don't want us looking at them.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit of a, we're not going to, put our heads above the parapet. Let's just stay cool.
Yeah, let's just stay here and drink our very expensive wine and live basically in France. Anyway, outside of giving your favourite jumper its name and being home to the mystery series Bergerac, which
I did not know Bergerac
was on Jersey.
was on Jersey.
I don't know if I've ever watched Bergerac.
I haven't, but it's one of those things you're just aware of, aren't you? Like, I've never watched Bergerac.
Right.
Like, don't get me wrong, I used to watch all of the classics. With my mum when I was younger, I used to watch Diagnosis Murder.
Mm-hmm.
I used to watch
Wire in the Blood.
Wire in the Blood. I used to watch Quincy.
Yeah.
Columbo.
Yeah.
What was the one with the guy with OCD?
Oh, Monk.
Yep. Watched it all. Murder, She Wrote. Rest in peace.
Okay, so Bergerac, established, Jersey. But Jersey doesn't really get mentioned that often in the world stage. It's serene, it's quite picturesque, it's British owned, but just off the coast of France. And the population is pretty wealthy because they are drawn to Jersey by pretty favourable tax breaks. It's not Grand Cayman favourable, but it's better than here.
Mm-hmm.
Jersey's harbours are full of gently swaying yachts, and its driveways contain gleaming sports cars that rarely see any action above 40 miles an hour. And short of a few petty thefts, underage drinkers, and that sort of thing, nothing much happens on Jersey to disturb the peace.
It's like all of the places in Midsummer Murders where they shouldn't be having regular occurrences of murders.
Yep.
Like, that's it.
Midsummer Murders, shot where I grew up.
Oh, well, there you go.
All around Old Amersham, Great Missenden.
Mm.
They were going to call it Missenden Murders, but they thought it would be too close to home, so they changed it.
Yeah, you want to keep it kind of vague.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, it is very Midsummer Murders-y. There doesn't seem to be enough people there to do many crimes. But when word got out that a popular social Jersey couple were bludgeoned to death in their bungalow with a nunchuck, the news tore through the island like wildfire. The people of Jersey had never seen the like of anything like this, and they didn't know that it was only just beginning. There would be detectives bugging a grand Scottish hotel in the hope of a confession, a 6-year investigation across 3 continents, and finally, the Royal Navy would be engaged in a dramatic chase of a killer across the high seas.
It does sound indeed like a Midsummer Murders feature-length film.
Yes, exactly.
And this story today starts at St Andrews University in Scotland. So appropriately bougie.
That's where all the royals go.
Exactly. And this is where Nicholas and Elizabeth Newall first met. Now, if you haven't heard of this university, St Andrews is the best university in Scotland and the second best in the whole of the UK. And golf was actually invented just down the road in the 1550s. Who knew it? It's a very high caliber area, high caliber university. Highbrow pursuits.
Yep, you get some trousers put on your head when you graduate.
Oh.
There's like some ancient trousers that are kept in this little bag, and when you graduate, it gets put on your head.
Well, there you go. Does it beat Cambridge or Oxford to become the second best university in the UK as well? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
And for Nicholas and Elizabeth, this was the right place for them because their prestige matched not only the universities, but also each other's. Nicholas's family had made their millions in shipbuilding. As a kid, he was sent off to the country's most prestigious boarding school. He spent summers with his grandparents, while his parents went off on endless holidays. So what about Elizabeth? Well, she came from even more lofty origins than shipbuilding czars Nicholas, because her parents, who are often called farmers, were actually landed gentry.
Gentlemen farmers.
Yes, exactly. Now, they were very well-connected Freemasons as well and rubbed shoulders with all kinds of kind of clandestine and powerful crowds. So Elizabeth went off to boarding school just like Nicholas had at a very early age. She got a master's and was even offered a scholarship at Cambridge, but turned it down to get a diploma in education because she said life is for living, which really does sum Elizabeth up, as we are going to go on to find out.
You know, at Oxford and or Cambridge, you just get given a master's. You don't do one.
You do. So if you do your undergraduate there and then you wait a couple of years, they give you an honorary master's.
I think you pay like £5 or something.
Yeah. One of my friends I used to work with, she did psychology at Cambridge and then she got given a master's.
Yeah, as if it doesn't give you enough of a fucking head start, hey. Anyway.
So when Nicholas and Elizabeth met a few years later, they both found themselves teaching at a St Andrew's prep school. And Elizabeth was actually engaged to someone else when they first met. And against her parents' wishes, she actually broke off that engagement to be with Nicholas. And on this one, kind of with the parents here, it's not a good idea.
Nicholas was not only 9 years her senior, he was, by almost all accounts, a condescending arsehole. A family friend would later say of him that he was, quote, too busy looking down on the whole of human nature, sneering and jeering at humanity at large. Lovely. St Andrews is fucking full of those.
Sounds like a treat.
Nicholas insisted that anyone he considered beneath him, like service workers, called him Mr. Newall, and he would not be shy about correcting them. Did you know that my dad was not allowed to address my maternal grandfather by his name because he was a Catholic? He had to call him Mr. Jones.
I did not know that, but there you go.
Yeah. Anyway. Later in his life, Nicholas refused to speak to his cleaner, and he would rush out the room whenever he saw her. He was a stern and a harsh teacher. As we said, Elizabeth couldn't have been more different. Descriptions of her always contain the classic, kind of vague and slightly meaningless phrases like, she liked to enjoy herself. Who doesn't? I love to be miserable. But it is obvious that she had a real zest for life. She was always the life of the party, subject to whims, and always in search of the next great adventure. On the other side of the same coin, though, she was unpredictable and had quite a fierce temper. She was super competitive and mad about sport. She was the captain of her cricket team and absolutely slayed at tennis, golf, and badminton. Must have had very toned arms.
Mm-hmm.
Despite their differences, though, it was obvious to everyone that they were madly in love and somehow created a perfect pair. And it's pretty clear that they lived dramatic lives, always to the fullest, which when you've got bags of money and loads of privilege is not many obstacles in your way, really.
Mm-mm. But as perfect as they seemed for each other, when Elizabeth brought up the idea of kids, Nicholas was hesitant. Nicholas's life was exactly how he wanted it. Why mess that up with children? But he eventually relented, and the pair had 2 boys, Roderick and Mark. But from the off, Nicholas made it extremely clear that just because he had given in to Elizabeth's demands to have children, they were to be her responsibility. He would even sometimes refer to their children as Elizabeth's children.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like those men who's like, oh no, can't tonight I'm babysitting. They're your children.
I know.
It's called being a father.
I know.
Animal.
That's like the kind of thing like my parents would say to each other when they were pissed off with us. They'd be like, have you seen what your kid's done?
Oh, yeah.
But he just refers to them as Elizabeth's children. And even though Elizabeth had to deal with the kids herself, Nicholas would still demand the majority of his wife's time and attention for himself. So he's just a real stand-up kind of guy. So when Roderick was 3 and Mark was just 18 months old, Nicholas decided that they were all going to have a year off and sail to the Caribbean because, why the fuck not? So yes, if it wasn't incredibly obvious to you already, This man does not give a single fuck about his children, because I have recently spent time with 18-month-old babies, and I wouldn't want to take one of them on a massive longboat journey with me.
They're not particularly able seamen.
No. No. And nor am I. So they set off from St Andrews and made their way down the British coast in search of sun, sea, sand, and rum-soaked good times. More like vomit-soaked good times if you've got an 18-month-old with you, I would presume.
Or if you have too much rum.
Well, quite. But Nicholas's Pirates of the Caribbean fantasy was over before it even really began, because the 18-month-old Mark, predictably, got very sick very quickly. He was vomiting constantly and even blacked out several times. He was obviously too ill for the family to chance it on the rough open seas of the Atlantic heading to the Caribbean. So the whole family, with their whole lives on board, stopped off in St Helier on the island of Jersey. They checked into a hotel and fell in love with the island.
As we alluded to earlier, Jersey is one of the Channel Islands, and the Channel Islands are an archipelago in the English Channel just off the coast of Normandy. These islands have been in British hands since the 14th century, and although they are not technically part of the UK, they are dependencies of the British Crown, so they're kind of halfway there, not quite Commonwealth, not quite UK. They have their own constitutions, customs, and even currency, although they do trade in pounds, because it's better for them. Apart from the warm, sunny climate that comes from being basically France, wealthy Brits have been drawn to Jersey for decades for extremely lax on the tax things. And Jersey obviously charmed the Newalls no end because they dropped the West Indies adventure and decided to stay on Jersey for good. After a few years digging into their hefty reserves of old family money, the Newalls bought the Crow's Nest, a beautiful house up on a cliff with a view to die for. And there, Elizabeth and Nicholas settled into the life they'd always wanted. And that life was long afternoons at the tennis club and longer evenings with friends and absolutely silly amounts of wine. And we all know that posh people are the real pissheads. You find the red-faced uncle at the wedding, he will know where the whiskey is.
You are correct. And this busy social calendar that Elizabeth and Nicholas kept basically meant that Roderick and Mark, their children, were on their own. Because yes, just like both their parents, the two boys were shipped off almost immediately to a boarding school. Namely, the 30 grand a year Radley College, set in an 800-acre park near Oxford. And during the school holidays, the two boys would actually be sent off to stay with relatives, while their parents, who by the way have been child-free the rest of the year, basically spent an increasing amount of their time at their new property in Spain, even at Christmas. In fact, during the Christmas holidays, parents of Roderick and Mark's friends at school would invite them over to their house to stop the children from spending the holidays alone at the Crow's Nest. I mean, rough.
Is it Nicholas Nickleby that has to stay at school over Christmas because he has nowhere to go?
I think so.
We used to call him Nippleless Nipple Boobs.
Nippleless Nipple Boobs, good. I mean, Dickens was never my
No, I only ever watched the TV
adaptations
of it. And then I had to stop because his friend that he makes in the boarding school that has a learning disability made me cry, so I had to stop watching it.
But yes, they're living a very like Victoriana, rich, orphan life. It's true. I mean, like, I think obviously money can make you be able to provide a lot for your children in terms of an education and stability and that, but not necessarily emotional stability emotional support, which we are obviously seeing here. And one particular Christmas, the Newalls actually threw an enormous party for all of their friends in Spain. No expense was spared, caterers provided food for 80 guests, and the champagne flowed all night long. But during this time that they were living it up in Spain, Roderick, their son, was at a friend's house for Christmas, and Mark was all alone in Jersey. I mean, it's just like so sick. Nicholas makes it clear from the beginning he doesn't want kids. But you think once they're there, they are your progeny. Like, you're not interested in them at all? And Elizabeth did want children. So I think it's very surprising for me, the sort of the disinterest that she also goes on to show in them.
I think it's a real old money thing. Of like, it's not my job to raise you. That's school's job. That's what I pay them for.
Yeah.
See you at Easter, maybe.
Maybe, but probably not because we'll be in Spain.
Yeah. And you're not invited.
And you're not invited yet. Can you manage your own social diaries, please?
Right.
Really, really sad. Mark is all alone in Jersey, and on Christmas morning, he actually walked through an empty house to find his Christmas present, a shirt wrapped in a drawer. Now, a friend of the Newalls later said, they treated their son so coldly that if you treated your dog like that, you would be reported to the RSPCA. I don't think the boys ever had a kiss or cuddle from their parents all their lives.
And we know that that turns out really well-adjusted people.
Yeah, it's not going to fuck you up at all.
But what they lacked in affection, the boys' parents seemingly thought it was enough to make up for all of that with a richy rich lifestyle. The boys' childhoods were filled with sailing, scuba diving, water skiing, and, as soon as they were old enough, proper real-life skiing in the Alps, which I still cannot do. It was a life of luxury that made even their ultra-posh classmates jealous. Neither Mark or Roderick excelled at school, probably because they were too busy skiing, but they were very good at sport, and that meant they were very popular, because that's how school works. Reports of them from their school days are full of the public school boys' cliches. Banter, cockiness, mischief, etc. Roderick, in particular, became quite the showman when he'd had a drink. On several occasions, he climbed out of the high windows of the grand Victorian buildings at his school and danced on the roof. Their dad, on the other hand, was less jovial. He was quite firm and old school. And he thought that in return for the massive school fees, the boys should be guaranteed a path into higher education. And to be fair, that is how it has worked in this country for hundreds of years. But he wanted a step further. He didn't even just want them to get into the best universities. He wanted them to go on to what he called the professions, which were engineering, medicine, or law. Sounds like your parents.
Oh, that's just classic Indian thoughts. But they're also like, I'm not going to send you to private school. No. You just fucking do that. Yeah. It's not even the benefit of let me send you to the best school. It's you can go there. Yeah. And the best kids, they do well no matter where you go. But you can sit in your room and fucking crack on.
So Nicholas thought that good schooling was good parenting. So he figured with his job essentially done, he could concentrate on living his life.
Yeah, it's basically what you said, right? I'm paying hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds to this very expensive school.
Yeah.
So that means that I can do whatever the fuck I want and my kids should turn out exactly as I expect them to be, which is high earning, high status professionals who are completely well adjusted. Because otherwise, why did I just spend so much money on your education?
And he's not the only person who's ever thought like that.
Absolutely.
Look at our parliament.
No, 100%. And I think all of sort of Roderick and particularly Roderick's sort of antics at school, like climbing onto the roof, being a bit of a showman, does sound like a bit of a desperate plea for some sort of attention from somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And I even wonder if breaking the rules, like breaking onto the roof and stuff, would be in the hopes that the school would call his dad and that his dad might actually give him some attention of some form. But that doesn't happen.
No, and what else doesn't happen is neither of the boys, despite the megabucks spent on their education, neither one of the Newall boys went to university. Mark went into finance, which Nicholas was probably reasonably pleased with, and Roderick joined the army.
Now, another feature of absolutely every report on this case is Roderick Newall's striking, handsome, good looks. People go on about that at length when you talk about this case.
I can't see it.
No.
I'm looking at enhance. I have it in front of me now.
Yes.
He looks very, I think the most indicative feature in this country of seeing if someone is quote unquote well-bred is a ruddiness. Yes. And I would say he is quite ruddy.
Yes. I think he's got that kind of...
And that sort of like strawberry blonde thing going on.
He's got that sort of like posh public school boy look going on.
He's got the look.
He's got the look. And I also do think that to some extent people are maybe confusing his like physical attractiveness for the fact that he is very charismatic. Like Roderick is that. He's very like we said, he's very much a showman. He's got like the gift of the gab. So I think to some extent people like kind of confuse it with that. He also joins the army. He's a bit of a lad. Like I think it rolls into that kind of like Prince Harry. I don't think he's objectively attractive, but people like loved him because he's kind of like a bit cheeky. He's a bit of a showman. He was an army guy.
He improved after his beard transplant.
This is true. Do you have a beard transplant?
Yeah, man.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I didn't know that. But anyway, that's kind of what I think of it as being, right? Not like attractive on the street, but attractive.
Freak in the sheets.
Freak in the sheets.
Okay, got it.
So after a gap year in Australia, Roderick went to the military academy at Sandhurst, which is also where Harry went, isn't it? And at Sandhurst, Roderick rose to lieutenant before joining the prestigious Royal Green Jackets Regiment. There, he was trained in how to avoid surveillance, how to handle interrogation, and how to take a life. He went on 2 tours in Germany and earned the respect and admiration of the men in his command. Meanwhile, his brother Mark was absolutely killing it in the finance game. And Mark, by the age of 19, actually had his own flat on Jersey, as well as a sports car and a permanent table at one of the island's very best restaurants. And when the financially savvy Mark caught wind of his parents' fiscal habits, well, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Because Nicholas and Elizabeth had always had money and never seen any reason to deny themselves anything they wanted. So they spent recklessly and invested worse. And the higher Mark climbed in the financial world, the more he resented them spunking away what he saw as his inheritance. Mark eventually got a great new job at a top London bank and moved away from Jersey. He knew that his parents had much of their money invested in the Lloyd's of London investment market, and when he predicted a downturn was around the corner, he pleaded with them to withdraw this cash. But they didn't, and the market crashed. Mark found out that they would have to pay a lifetime of annual fees to Lloyd's. It added up to hundreds of thousands of pounds and would probably take up every last penny of the inheritance. And it could only be cancelled in the event of his parents' deaths.
Roderick and Mark's resentment tank was already full to the brim because they saw their childhood as a cruel and neglectful one. And then, in the mid-80s, the Newalls decided to sell the Crow's Nest, the boys' beautiful childhood home where they'd spent Christmases alone for years. They needed to sell it, they needed to free up some cash. And when you put that together with all of the money steadily trickling away, the anger within the Newall boys was growing. One summer, Roderick was struggling to pay his officer's mess bill and returned to Jersey to ask his mummy to help him pay for it. Elizabeth, in a slightly out-of-character move, decided that now, as an adult man, it was the time to teach him a lesson. Elizabeth told him that he should try and be more like his brother, and she refused to bail him out. So Roderick flipped. He beat his mother over the head and punched her in the face. Elizabeth later went on to drown her sorrows with a friend and sunk a litre of whiskey to herself. Posh people, man.
I mean, imagine the tolerance you've got to have to drink a litre of whiskey and not die.
I can't.
No.
After a few weeks, Roderick's parents forgave him for his outburst. He was known to have a temper, so they passed it off as a tantrum and moved on, even though he'd quite literally punched his mum in the face. But the relationship between all of the Newalls grew colder over the years. Which is why Elizabeth was pleasantly surprised when the boys got in touch one day to tell her that they were coming for a visit.
On Friday the 9th of October 1987, Roderick and Mark both flew back to hold a 48th birthday party for their mum Elizabeth. Excited to see them, Elizabeth actually booked a table at the Seacrest Hotel on the southern tip of the island. When her birthday came round 6 days later, Elizabeth and Nicholas realised that they were actually double booked though. And they actually ducked out to a friend's house for a little pre-dinner drink. So once again, just like they had done for so many times in their childhood, Mark and Roderick both arrived to an empty house. Still, they all met up later at the restaurant. And according to the restaurant's owner, Sergio Parmesan, which, again, if you want more of a fucking here is a feature-length Midsummer Murder / Poirot / some shit, his name is Sergio Parmesan.
Have I told you about the lasagnas?
The lasagnas.
Okay, so for reasons that are too complicated to explain, I'm affiliated with quite a large group of Canadians. And these Canadians told me of a friend of theirs who lives in Toronto, whose name is Rebecca Lasagna.
Excellent.
And Rebecca Lasagna's family own an Italian restaurant.
No.
Yes, they do. And all of the lasagna family live above said restaurant in flats on top of each other in layers like a lasagna.
It's too much.
I think about Rebecca Lasagna all the time.
It's just such a great name.
Every time I meet someone from Toronto, I'm like, do you know Rebecca Lasagna?
That is outstanding. Well, I've not met about Parmesan before, but
No,
I do appreciate this. I think if you have a food-related surname, it is your duty to start a restaurant.
Yes, and imitate your life
Exactly.
in the shape of that food.
Precisely. So, yes, they go to the Seacrest Hotel. Sergio Parmesan observes the family that night. And he said that they looked like a family that were having a brilliant time. They dined on lobster and seafood platters and got through 2 bottles of champagne and 3 bottles of wine. And Mark, who was driving, wasn't even drinking. He stuck to the Cokes. So that means that Elizabeth, Nicholas and Roderick, between the 3 of them, had 5 bottles of alcohol.
Yep, sounds about right.
And that's obviously not to mention whatever Elizabeth and Nicholas had at their friend's house when they'd gone for that pre-dinner little drink.
Litre of whiskey.
That they couldn't get out of for some reason, even though their children were coming into town after years. So yeah, safe to say that, except for Mark, everyone must have been absolutely fucking wrecked by the end of dinner. And in quite an unusual move, I think, Elizabeth and Nicholas apparently were thrilled to have the family back together. So Mark took care of the bill, and at midnight, they all returned to the bungalow, because remember, they don't live at the Crow's Nest anymore.
The next morning, the Newalls' friend Maureen Ellum came over with a bunch of flowers for Elizabeth's birthday. Roderick opened the door and said his parents were still asleep. Maureen remembers being surprised that the Newalls had laid in until almost 9 a.m. I'm surprised they've ever been up at 9 a.m. the amount these people drink. And that's what Maureen eventually decided. She decided to let the 9 a.m. lie-in pass because she knew that they had been boozing the night before. Maureen made a joke that Roderick should leave the flowers on Elizabeth's bed. So if she woke up, she'd think she'd died. How does that work, Maureen?
I don't know. Maybe Maureen was the one drinking this fucking litre of whiskey. Like, what's happening? I don't get it. Maybe it's, Jersey jokes.
Jersey jokes. Jersey bants. We don't get it, and it doesn't seem that Roderick got the joke either, because he did not laugh. Roderick and Mark left the island that day. Mark went back to London, and Roderick returned to his army barracks. Maureen waited by the phone that day, waiting for Elizabeth to emerge and ring her to thank her for the flowers. But the call never came. Neither did she pick up the following day, or the next. Friends started to notice that the extremely social Newalls weren't turning up to any social engagements, and their grey Citroen hadn't moved from its parking spot. A week passed, and Maureen phoned a neighbour and asked for him to go and knock on the door. When that neighbour got no answer, he and a friend jumped over the garden wall to investigate, and the Newalls' veranda sliding doors were wide open. The pair searched the house top to bottom. It was sweltering. The heating had been left on high. But no one was home.
So, the group that had discovered the house phoned the Newall brothers, and Roderick reported his parents missing. 8 days after the Newalls were last seen, a police investigation was opened, and without any evidence of an actual crime having been committed, it started as just a missing persons case. Now, this wasn't good enough for old Maureen. She noticed that something was off. The Newalls' hearthrug had disappeared, and a deep stain she had noticed on the living room carpet a few days before had also now mysteriously vanished. And if they had left willingly, so Nicholas and Elizabeth have maybe just gone off on one of their holidays, why would they have cranked the heating up so high? So Maureen started pressing the police to bring in a forensic team. But investigators just insisted that the Newalls would turn up. They did, however, call the brothers back to Jersey to help with the inquiries. And when Detective Inspector Graham Nimmo met the boys, he says, quote, "Within 5 minutes, and I mean 5 minutes, I knew that there was something wrong." Nimmo chose to speak to Mark first, and Roderick left the room. Mark came across as smart, concerned, and answered all of the detective's questions. But within minutes, Roderick, his brother, burst back in, agitated, demanding to be present. He was obviously ushered out, but he did it again shortly after. Their stories, however, the boys' stories that is, mostly tallied. And despite all of the random outbursts from Roderick, the detectives did have to concede that the boys' stories mostly tallied. They both said that shortly after midnight on their mum's birthday, after having gone out for dinner, they both went to sleep at Mark's Jersey home before returning to their parents' bungalow for breakfast and lunch the next day. Then they both flew home in the afternoon. However, there were some inconsistencies. Nimmo dug deeper, asking them a series of what seemed like mundane details. When he asked Roderick where he slept, for example, Roderick said that he was downstairs on cushions, but Mark said that he had given his brother his own bed upstairs. So which was it? Plus, friends had even noticed Roderick wearing one of Elizabeth's cashmere jumpers. Odd behaviour for someone hoping for his mother's return. And again, it was suspicious, sure. But with still no trace of the Newalls, or any sort of evidence that anything bad had happened, they couldn't really do anything about it.
I do a lot of things to get my hands on a cashmere jumper. This is a good point to reiterate that the state of Jersey police force are not super familiar with double murder inquiries. Jersey's a pretty peaceful place. Around 40% of the crime at the time of this story was theft-related, and most of the rest was to do with drinking-related offensive. Drink driving, I would imagine, is pretty rife. The police were just as likely to be organising raffles and charity drives for island charities than they were to be chasing down shoplifters or underage drinkers. In fact, until the 50s, all but one of the island's 12 parishes policed themselves. They were all part-time positions, and there was no main police force. And while this case had officers stumped, they did ramp up the search on the island itself. Holes were dug all over Jersey. The police checked the coasts, the dumps, cesspits, septic tanks, and boreholes. Updates hit the local news every night, and everyone on the island had their own theory, from organised crime to drug smuggling, and the meaning behind a supposed pink Mercedes said to have been spotted outside the Newalls' bungalow. The police even brought in a psychic who had helped them find a body on the island of Guernsey the previous year. Guernsey's another Channel island. But this psychic, his dowsing rods went haywire, and he also had to admit defeat in the Newalls case. Investigators were even sent to Scotland, Spain, and other neighbouring islands to chase up any leads on where the Newalls could have gone. But after 4 weeks, 30 people working full-time on the case, and still no bodies, the investigation, despite their best efforts, was losing steam. That is, until a tiny speck of human blood was found on a poker in the Newalls' fireplace.
And this is where the investigation really stepped up. The Home Office sent a forensic team to investigate the bungalow. They ripped up carpets and poured over every surface. And what had just seemed like an empty house, now, undoubtedly, became the scene of a bloody attack. There were minute traces of blood across the floors, walls, and door frames. These spots of blood continued to the bathroom, washed all over the bath, and covered the shampoo bottles and bath towels, which begs the question, why wasn't it checked before? Why did they find one speck of blood on a poker, but up until then, with 30 people working on this, just because they didn't have a body, spray some fucking luminol around?
Well, unfortunately, they only had a giant magnifying glass.
Ah, I see. And Maureen. That's all they've got. It just seems baffling that it took that long for them to check the house itself. It's not like they found it a secondary location. It's weird. But again, like we said, this isn't a police force that we're used to dealing with this kind of thing. So basically, it now became incredibly clear that someone had been lying on the living room floor long enough to lose a huge amount of blood. It was also clear that someone had spent hours meticulously cleaning that blood up. A duvet cover had even been washed and put back on the bed damp, and the heating had seemingly been left on so high to let the house dry out after this deep scouring that it had got. It was proof, it seemed, of a double murder. And the police had 2 main suspects. And so the brothers were called back to Jersey once again for questioning. They were shown photographs of the crime scene. And although this was supposedly the first evidence they'd seen that their parents were dead, very tellingly, there was no flicker of a reaction. Which, yes, considering up until now, the police and everybody's just been telling you that they're missing. Maybe you think they've got enough money to go on holiday and you just haven't heard from them, as is pretty typical. The police are now telling you that the house is a fucking bloodbath. And they're just like, okay, suspicious. And in another sort of telling but very unusual step, the boys just kind of answered all the questions that the police had, but had no further comments or no further follow-up questions for the authorities, which, if you need an alarm bell, that is pretty much as loud as it gets. But Mark did start a campaign and personally offered a reward of £40,000 for any information leading to a conviction. The police were almost certain that the brothers had committed this crime, and they felt that they had a strong enough case.
And whilst they were building that case, a new discovery was made. The remains of a bonfire had been found near the old family home by 2 dogs. And we love a dog fact on this show. I don't know if we can call this one a fun fact, but these 2 dogs were on loan to Jersey from the Lancashire police. And these dogs had come straight from sniffing around Saddleworth Moor as a part of the Moors murders investigations.
Famous dogs. Famous crime-fighting dogs.
Famous dogs, but also they didn't find all of them.
No, but it's big.
It's kind of as big as it gets as a police sniffing dog. And fibres from this fire location were recovered, and they matched fibres from cleaning tools that had been used in the house. And some of those fibres matched the Newall's carpets. But that wasn't all. Other items found in the bonfire happened to be the remains of Elizabeth's black handbag, the bowl of Nicholas's pipe, and his glasses.
Not things you typically throw on a bonfire.
No.
No matter how drunk or rich you are.
I'll take this pipe to my grave. So the Newall brothers were questioned yet again. And they were asked even more detailed questions about the lunch they said they had had with their parents the day after Elizabeth's birthday. Questions like who washed up, who still had food on their plates. Using these statements, the police made a list of 60 points where the brothers' stories differed. And so, 15 months after Nicholas and Elizabeth Newall were seen, after more than 1,000 people had been interviewed, 350 statements had been taken, and 1,200 lines of inquiry had been followed up, Graham Nimmo submitted a report to his superiors as to why the brothers should be charged. But he was denied. Without any bodies, the Jersey equivalent of the CPS just thought there wasn't enough to go any further.
And finding a body is vital in a lot of cases to secure a conviction. But if 2 people go abruptly missing, have no communication with anyone who knows them, including their sons and all of their close friends on this small island that they are very, very sociably linked to, and you can't prove that they're using any of their money anywhere to survive, how are you just going to be, and you find their house filled with blood? It kind of feels like there's enough circumstantial evidence there.
Well, apparently they have higher standards on Jersey. And so the case went cold. Once again. The brothers went their separate ways and resumed their very different lives. And the people of Jersey moved on too. Gossip stopped spreading, and islanders mostly forgot about Elizabeth and Nicholas Newall. People mostly agreed that they would probably never find out what happened. But luckily for you, and us, and the world, that was not the case.
When Roderick Newall arrived on Jersey for his mother's birthday, he hired a red van and drove it to a builder's merchant in Jersey's capital, St Helier. And he racked up just about the murderiest of murdery shops we've ever featured here on Red-Handed. Because Mr. Roderick Newall paid £103.42 in cash for 2 spades, 2 tarpaulins, 2 torches, batteries, a pickaxe, heavy-duty plastic sacks, a saw, rope, and a can of upholstery cleaner.
You get points for paying in cash.
Yes.
You get a bajillion points taken away, deducted, for getting it all in the same place.
And also for getting it on the fucking island you're going to do it on. Where the police are just going to be like, anybody in buying odd stuff? And be like, oh yeah, this guy came into my shop and bought a bunch of stuff. And it's like a few miles from where the family got fucking, quote unquote, murdered.
Yeah, see you in the pub.
Like, he's not even from there. Do the shot before you come. Do it on your way. Anyway, he doesn't. And so Roderick buys all of these things and then stashed them in his van. Then on the night of Elizabeth's murder dinner.
Leave that in.
Then on the night of Elizabeth's birthday dinner, the family all returned to the bungalow. Mark, probably sick of hanging out with his fucking smashed family, soon made his excuses and left because remember, Mark didn't drink anything that day because he had to drive. Elizabeth went off to bed, and Roderick and his dad opened a bottle of Nicholas's favourite scotch because they haven't had enough to drink yet. Nicholas started questioning his son about his future plans, and Roderick revealed that he wanted to leave the army. To this, his father Nicholas was incensed. His son hadn't made it to university and now he was giving up on the army too. And apparently, this row escalated into a full-blown drunken rage. Roderick faced up to his father for the first time in his life and accused him directly of neglect. Nicholas ordered Roderick to leave, but he refused. So Nicholas shoved his son. Roderick fell to the ground, hitting his head on a table as he fell, and then the fight was on.
In the weeks leading up to the brothers' visit, Elizabeth had been clearing out some of their old stuff from the house. And that night, filled with rage at his father, Roderick saw one of those boxes in the living room, and in it, a Chinese rice flail, which you little Philistine, probably only know as a nunchuck.
I feel stupid.
Me too! Roderick grabbed the weapon and he launched it at his father. He repeatedly beat him over the head, and when Elizabeth heard the disturbance and rushed in, Roderick went after her too. He chased his own mum into the bedroom and bludgeoned her to death. And with both of his parents' bodies lying silent and lifeless on the ground, and with their blood sprayed all around their bungalow home, Roderick finally started to understand what he'd done. His plan to kill his parents with precision and planning had gone completely out of the window in a second of impulsivity. So he called his brother. Mark was woken by the ringing phone, and when he answered, his brother Roderick gave him a choice. He said, "I've killed Mum and Dad. If you don't come round now, I'll kill myself."
Oh, good. Good morning.
And faced with the decision to either let your own brother commit suicide or incriminate yourself in your parents' double murder, Mark decided that he was in. The brothers tightly wrapped their parents' still warm bodies in the tarpaulins that Roderick had picked up, and then they carried them out to the van. The brothers drove to the north of the island, to the woods behind their childhood home. There they burnt their parents' possessions on a bonfire. They dug a trench and rolled the bodies inside it. Roderick had learned how to search for bodies in the military, and he picked a spot that he knew would be hard to find. Then the brothers got back in the van and returned to their parents' bungalow to get to work scrubbing away any trace of their parents' blood.
In January 1991, so 3 years after the murders, the Newall brothers returned to Jersey. With their parents' bodies still missing, they came to have them legally declared dead and to claim their inheritance. As sole beneficiaries of the will, the boys inherited just under £1 million between them. Roderick left the army and bought an ocean-going yacht called the Astral Soma. He sailed around the world, visiting Africa, the Caribbean, New Zealand, and South America, and arrived in Brazil in early 1992. In Brazil, he got himself a girlfriend called Helena, and I want to say pedo, but I'm guessing it's pedo.
One would hope.
I hope so. He basically lived there with her for the next 6 months. During this time, Mark continued to excel in the world of finance. Using his half of the inheritance, he bought homes in London and Paris and often travelled between them, first class. It's really shocking how far $500,000 will get you in 1991. Because right now, you could maybe buy a garage in London with that. So by the time 5 years had passed, the murder inquiry had basically completely wound down. The boys seemed to have gotten away with it. But, ever the hothead, Roderick couldn't keep his stupid mouth shut. In July 1992, Roderick sailed back to the UK to visit his Aunt Nan, short for Nancy, not like his confusing auntie grandmother in some sort of weird incestuous twist. And when he was visiting her, Roderick went on and on, all about his big adventures in his massive fucking yacht. And he told her about his plans to kit it out even more and sail to the Antarctic. Eventually, conversations turned to the supernatural, as they always do. And Roderick asked Nan if she had ever had a vision of his mother. And she said yes, on the day she disappeared. And Nan went on to describe a nightmare, one in which Elizabeth had died. And in that dream, apparently Elizabeth had told Aunt Nan, "I told you he meant it when he said he would kill me. I told you it would happen, but leave the matter rest." This got Roderick's attention. Nan said, "I would still like to know what happened." And Roderick replied, "Even if you knew exactly what happened, you would still not understand." And when Nan presses him saying, "Why wouldn't I understand?" he says, "Because I don't understand myself." And after this weird and confusing, bizarre fucking mental posho conversation about the supernatural and apparitions and whatnot, Roderick closed up. And Nan, for some reason, let the conversation move on. Really feels like Nan's in quite a lot of denial here.
He just doesn't know when to quit.
No, he doesn't. I think it's like, you see this with Roderick, there's just like he can't keep it together. He's a fucking liability, 100%. But after this, Roderick left and said that he was planning to visit his uncle Stephen in Scotland, then hit the high seas. And after he was gone, Nan called the police.
So she does come to her senses. Maybe it was just a really good interview tactic.
Maybe. Better than the fucking police ever got.
So, after years of sailing around the world, having gotten away with the almost perfect crime, how could Roderick have let himself slip up like this? Well, guilt, it turns out, is a very, very real thing. In a documentary about this case, forensic psychologist Dr. Vincent Egan says the following: "People find it hard to live with guilt and shame inside them. It's a very corrosive emotion. People want to unburden themselves by disclosing what they've done to someone when they've done something bad. I do that. I can't help myself."
I just bury it.
Yeah, no, I need to confess in front of the eyes of God and the donkey. And after Nan called the police with her little revelation, the investigation into the double homicide of the Newalls suddenly jumped back into gear. Jersey police contacted Stephen, the uncle that Roderick was on his way to, who also happens to be Nicholas's identical twin brother. He kept that one under his hat. And Stephen agreed to take part in a surveillance operation. In classic mental posho style, Stephen was staying in the 300-acre grounds of the Dunkeld House Resort Hotel in Perthshire to celebrate the 60th birthday of his wife. So, Jersey detectives arranged with Stephen to bug his hotel suite. 2 doors down from Stephen's room was a suite filled to bursting with 90s surveillance equipment, which is large, and also a whole team of officers. And they listened in to the meeting between Roderick and his uncle Stephen. And that conversation went on for hours.
So Uncle Stephen had been briefed extensively about the admissibility of tape evidence in court. He knew that Roderick could not be led or coaxed. Any admission of guilt had to come naturally from him. And he knew that the most important thing of all was finding out where the bodies were buried. That was going to be the only thing that would give them like solid, hardcore, you did it, concrete evidence. So during this meeting, once again, Roderick waxed lyrical about his world adventures. Detectives knew that a huge amount of money and work had gone into setting this up, and it seemed as though it was all for nothing. But after a few patient hours, Stephen said, "I had a strange call from your aunt. You said something to her. What was all that about?" And Roderick repeated what he had said to Aunt Nan. They had no idea why it had happened. But he said that he alone carried the blame. Stephen said that he supposed there wouldn't be much left of them now. But Roderick corrected his uncle. He said that they were wrapped up in plastic and that the clothes they were wearing would, quote, pin it down to the night. And finally he said, which is kind of the nail in the coffin, "I've been forced to live with my guilt." In the room down the hall, police knew they were listening to the murderer.
But Jersey police don't have any jurisdiction in Scotland.
They're has been a murder.
So they could not arrest him. And without an arrest warrant, they'd only be able to hold Roderick for a few hours. So, whilst the officers contacted the powers that be to get that warrant that they so desperately needed, they tailed Roderick as he drove away from the hotel. He left just after 7 p.m. and he was followed by unmarked police cars. But it was time for Roderick's military training to come good again. On the motorway, Roderick started what's called dry cleaning, which is speeding up and slowing down, which is what people do to identify if they are being followed. He also kept doubling back on himself, pulling into service stations, etc., and just after midnight, he put his foot down. He was last seen by police on a double roundabout, and then he disappeared into the night. Having shaken off his pursuers, Roderick drove to the coast, boarded a ferry to France, which is where his yacht was, and then he set sail into the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the Scottish hotel recordings were cleaned up and passed on to an attorney general. And 3 days after Roderick had confessed to his uncle and a room of secret policemen, an arrest warrant was approved. And that meant that the chase was on.
For a full week, investigators used everything at their disposal to try and track him down. Airborne surveillance, patrol aircraft, Interpol missions, and even a private yacht tracing agency called Seaclaim.
We have too much money in this world. There to be a private yacht tracing agency. I bet it's not even the only one.
No. So eventually they managed to track Mark down and found that he'd booked a string of flights. London to Paris, Paris to Madrid, and Madrid to Tangier, Morocco. 2 officers went undercover and dressed as tourists to Morocco and found the Astral Soma, Roderick's yacht. They caught word that a Royal Navy frigate, the HMS Argonaut, which frigate is one of my new favourite words. And they found out that basically the HMS Argonaut was posted nearby and it was made available to help them. Communications with Tangier temporarily went down, but when they were reconnected, the agent shouted down the line that Roderick had just set sail. So the HMS Argonaut set off to chase Roderick down on the high seas. And after a 2-day pursuit, they eventually caught up with him 150 miles from where they'd started. They contacted his boat and said that the Argonaut had been empowered by higher authorities to stop and search vessels in the area. Assuming that his papers had to be routinely inspected, Roderick actually left his yacht, fell for it, and rowed over to the Navy vessel. He climbed on board, and 5 armed officers of the Royal Gibraltar Police filed out in bulletproof vests. And so, finally, on the 6th of August 1992, Roderick Newall was arrested and taken to Gibraltar Moorish Castle Prison.
But there were still no bodies, making it almost impossible to convict Roderick Newall for the murder of his parents. He fought his extradition from Gibraltar, and it hung in the balance for 18 months. His face hit the tabloid front pages across the continent, and the hybristophilia brigade, taken in by his public boy looks, predictably flooded him with love letters. Eventually, Gibraltar ruled that the taped recording from the Scottish hotel was inadmissible, since the police's tactics had been underhanded and circumvented Roderick's right to silence. So the police needed something else, and they started with Roderick's boat. In a book on board his boat, they discovered the name Helena Pedo. So they flew to Sao Paulo and interviewed her at length. And Helena gave one hell of a statement. It was quite long, but importantly, it included the story of one night where Roderick read aloud a violent scene from a Hermann Hesse novel and then grabbed Helena by the shoulders, shouting, "I am a murderer, I am a murderer." She's like, "Mate, I've just met you. You just pitched up in Brazil and now you're telling me all your darkest secrets. This is nuts."
I mean, honestly, on the scale of like 1 to full crazy of things you hear on dates with guys, reading aloud from a Hermann Hesse novel and then shaking you while he screams he's a murderer is up there.
And that was all they needed. Roderick was extradited to stand trial in Jersey with his brother Mark. On the plane over, he was given a map and asked to show where the bodies of his parents were buried. He rolled the pen in his fingers for a while, and then brought it down on the map.
It is shocking to me that after he made all of those random confessions to Nan, what he says to Uncle Stephen, all of that is not enough, but him just shaking a random woman in Brazil and saying, I'm a murderer, was the final nail in the coffin. This whole case is confusing to me.
I guess in a way, Gibraltar's doing a very thorough job of like admissible evidence,
Sure,
you know?
Sure. I think that's the thing. There's a lot of agencies, a lot of jurisdictions involved in this. People have different standards of what's enough for a conviction, and it's very confusing because of that. So within 6 hours of landing in Jersey, Roderick gave a full confession, which ended with, "My feelings of guilt and remorse have built up ever since that night. I found it increasingly hard to live a lie." He was driven immediately to the site he had pointed out on the map, and there investigators dug hole after hole based on Roderick's increasingly cryptic guidance. More than 60 journalists camped out at the site, waiting for a discovery. And after 3 days of digging, a JCB came across a sheet of black polythene. And on removing it, police saw a man's shoe. Then they found Elizabeth and Nicholas lying head to toe, with Nicholas in his dinner jacket and Elizabeth in her nightdress. Since the sheet had been wrapped up so tightly around them, they were astonishingly well preserved, considering that 6 years they had been buried. And really, what can we say here? It seems like Roderick's army training had clearly informed every stage of his plan that night. And his quote-unquote dashing face was soon splashed across the national headlines once again. And he got himself the nickname, the Kung Fu Killer, based, of course, on his choice of weapon. Roderick insisted that Mark had no part to play in the murder, and he said that there had been no premeditation.
I think your van would beg to differ. And the courts do agree with us. Firstly, there is Roderick's very murdery shop that he did in the days before he killed his parents. And then there were the lacerations. The court heard for the first time about the 7 head wounds Nicholas had suffered. They were up to 8 centimetres long, and they were severe. And what that means is that it's very likely that Roderick brought the pickaxe from the van into the house with him and used it on his father. So he had bought an axe to kill his parents with, and then he sat through a lobster dinner with them before using it on his father that night. And I think we can all agree that is exactly what premeditation is. And then there's the contents of Nicholas's stomach to consider. Nicholas was absolutely full to bursting with seafood, so it looked like both of the parents had been killed pretty shortly after they'd eaten. Pathologists also found, within Nicholas's system, phenobarbital. Phenobarbital is a powerful sedative, and it was found in Nicholas's liver and in his stomach in higher doses than would be visible if Nicholas had taken it himself. Despite all of that, it would seem that the question of premeditation was never settled in court, because another toxicologist questioned the conclusions of the autopsies. Nevertheless, after 6 years, thousands of interviews across a dozen countries and 3 continents, Roderick Newall was convicted of his parents' murder. He began a double life sentence on the 8th of August 1994. Mark received 8 years for assisting in the crime and the conspiracy to conceal it.
So you might be thinking, if Roderick started a double life sentence in 1994, he must still be winning over hearts and minds in a maximum security facility somewhere to this day in 2023. Well, no, because as early as 2006, 12 years after his conviction, Roderick Newall was working as an IT lecturer at a further education college in Chichester, and with a beard and glasses to disguise that famously quote-unquote handsome face. And he was going into work every day from an open prison nearby. When word got out that he was teaching teenagers, the principal said that Rod's work was exemplary and that he should be allowed to get on with his life. And so, depending on, I guess, where you fall on the rehabilitation versus, like,
retribution
question, you might well agree with this principle. And while the Slayer rule prevented Roderick from any of his inheritance, that didn't apply to old Marco. And using his financial savviness, he turned his parents' £1 million into more than £3 million. And he, no doubt, helped his brother get back on his feet. So it may well have been the perfect crime after all.
I mean, I was about to say I hope he did. But then I was like, if my brother forced me to conceal a murder and I also did prison time for that,
Yeah.
would I?
I'd be a little bit pissed. It's hard, isn't it? Because it's like the two of them, you know, they have definitely have a neglectful childhood.
Sure, I'm sure.
And I'm sure that
Mark
bonded
understood
them.
why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure that bonded them against their parents. And I think Mark, like we said, was already pissed off at the fact that his parents were so financially irresponsible. And yeah, it's a complicated story, but there you go. That is it. The story of Roderick Newall.
Let's all move to Jersey.
Let's.